Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To some and peace out to the rest of you. Black heart, black mind, black hand again. This is very important this time. I want y'all to hit the share button. It's more important this time than it is for many other times and occasions because the truth be told, really, this is something that a lot of you contend with on a daily basis. And knowing that you contend with this on a daily basis, a lot of y'all aren't going to see the live because this is early in the morning for many people. I am anywhere from 7 to 11 hours ahead of the States. No, I'm sorry, anywhere from 7 to 5 hours ahead of any place in the United States in any given time of year. And actually, if you count Hawaii, I may be something like beyond over 12 hours. So a lot of you are going to see the replay for this, and that's okay. But if you see the replay for this, then nonetheless, I still want you to hit the share button. When you wake up and you see this, as soon as you hear me, go ahead and start the share button, because this is important. The reason that we failed to tackle this, it's really not a reason, it's reasons. There is an overarching reason that we failed, but if you remind me, I'll get to this towards the end. Right now, at this point, the way things are, it's reasons that we could say. And the underlining one, you'll probably figure out on your own as I discuss it. Yesterday, I was listening to an older panel, an older live stream from another YouTube content creator who has begun to tackle this issue. And I'm glad he has, it's good. And one of the things he talked about several months ago, about a year ago, was how it was affecting men, how colorism was pretty much affecting paler men. And then recently he began to talk about how it's affecting men and women. And he is largely dealing with the colorism that goes against white supremacy, or that is intended to go against white supremacy. He's dealing with not the international version, but the American, Canadian, and British reaction to it, in which Yellen gets slammed and crapped on and insulted. But this is not necessarily about him. I was corresponding with Select a J or Select a Job, but where I live, I can't use any of the names of God to describe a person, obviously. But I was corresponding with him about doing a live stream later on. And he's been nice, and he said, look, we'll schedule a time. So we're working on scheduling a time now, Lord willing. But there was also something else too. There was another commentator, not a content creator, but another commentator on there. And when I mentioned something about how most of us aren't willing to go this route and discriminate, this commentator said to me, no, Black, actually, that's not true. In reality, there are a few that are willing to go, and there are a few that are willing to do this. There are a few that are willing. I mean, actually, it's several of them. It's easy to find people that are willing to do this. He said to me, Black, I can tell you about a few instances myself. And so I asked him how old he was, and he's in his 20s. And that explained everything to me. He told me the situations he dealt with, and they were close in time. They were close together in time. He explained that to me, them to me, actually. One case, I don't know the age of the person that was responsible for shutting him out of an opportunity, but another case when he was ill-treated with his sibling, that person was about my age. I mean, I'm sure the person's older than I am, but the person at that time was as old as I am now, roughly. That said to me everything. What we're dealing with here is a scenario in which if you were in my age group, your early 40s, Having to always discuss colorism would sound like an unhealthy obsession. It is something that we see as an issue to tackle and get rid of, not something to obsess over. And understandably so. If you are in your 30s, you probably see it as something to tackle. I assume so. But you would not be willing to obsess over it too much. I guess the point of view was inherited from those of my age group. But if you were in your 20s, especially if you're on either end of the spectrum, chances are you really have to deal with this. You've had to deal with it growing up a lot. You're in your 20s, so the memory of what you had to deal with anywhere from 14 to 18 is still fresh in your mind. But on top of that, it's not stopping when you turn 20 or 18 for that matter. It's not stopping when high school is over. That's what I'm getting at. It goes on and it goes on. And you could be in your 20s and you still have to deal with these issues. You have to deal with crazy fathermuckers, some of whom are even my age and should have known better and should have outgrown such unhealthy obsessions. And you may have to deal with hostile situations from them. I was unaware of that until this young man actually told me the stories. I didn't realize how different the experience is for people in my age group versus how it is for people that are now in their 20s. You see, 20 years ago, I was 20 myself. Give me a moment. Let me type something in the chat because I have to run my AC, and if I don't run it, then if I don't run the air conditioning in this room, and the computer will heat up. So let me type something in the chat right quick. All right, so as I was saying, you may have to deal with this in going into your 20s. And see, while I was coming up, you wouldn't have to deal with something like that all the time. You would rarely come across instances like that. And instances of shouting and maybe even violence, well, that would have darn near been unheard of. A few cases where somebody jokes with you might have been about as bad as it got. See, amongst my age group, it really was a lot of jokes. Past age 18, really, you would have heard jokes. Actual hatred based on this would be considered an unhealthy obsession. It didn't matter from whom and to whom the hatred flowed. The bottom line is it would have been seen as an unhealthy obsession. So even if I didn't hate people of another melanin count, if I always talked about them, made jokes about them, it would have been considered unhealthy and obsessive. If if somebody was always doing that, just joking with me all the time, it's jokes, but it would have passed a certain point, it would have been considered an unhealthy obsession. For the people in their 20s, nobody's sitting up and saying, hey, look, you're carrying this childhood obsession with you into adulthood. And I'm not talking about the ones that react. I'm talking about the ones who provoke, not the reactors, but the provocateurs. No one apparently from my age group or those in their 30s or those in their 20s have pulled these folks off to the side and say, you got this very childish obsession over shade and phenotype. That's where the mistake came in. And that's why this commentator has had to deal with it. And that brought something to mind that Caesar Cannon said. And I want to thank Caesar Cannon. A few weeks ago when you were talking about the closing of a non-black man and light-skin motivations channel, you said that you had talked to a lot of these young girls that were of paler hues and maybe even looser hair textures, and they were all saying the same thing. They actually face acts of violence growing up based on this, and it might not stop them to adulthood. And I didn't put two and two together and realize, wait, you were probably talking to young women in their 20s. I don't know about the 30s, but maybe in their 20s, who either had a fresh memory of recent violence or from let's say 18 and under, or had dealt with it even after age 18. In adulthood, have had to deal with actual hostility and maybe even violence based on this. I didn't put two and two together and realize, wait a minute, the younger people have a much more intense experience with this than people my age did. Now, I had an intense experience with it growing up, but I didn't know what it was about. I wasn't aware of how much of it was colorism. I admit, I had to find out later, partially because amongst the people of my age group and the elders at that time, you just didn't talk about it that much. It was there, but not everybody said anything about it. Matter of fact, a lot of the assumptions that you now hear being voiced, and a lot of the stereotypes you hear people openly voice, were just subconscious assumptions back in the day. Light-skinned brothers can't fight, ain't aggressive, ain't trying to fight. These were assumptions back then. People really didn't give voice to a lot of times. They would act like they didn't know why they thought this way. Some people really didn't know why they thought this way. Yeah, man, he looked like he gonna win this sprint, this 100-meter sprint. He looked like he'll win that sprint. Why? He dark and got muscles, that's why. Yeah, he looked like he gonna win track and field because he was darker and he wasn't obese. Oh man, he looked like he ain't gonna run fast. Why? Because he light skinned. He can't run that fast. This wasn't said out loud when I was coming up, so a lot of colorism we were unaware of. Now these folks coming up recently, folks about 20 years younger, maybe even 15 years younger than my own age group, they've had to actually deal with people saying this stuff out loud to them from a young age. You can't do X, Y, and Z, or you look like you can't do X, Y, and Z based on your phenotype. You look like you'll have this kind of behavior. Now stop and think about this. You look like you will behave this kind of way. That's exactly what we have told other races. Don't you do that to us. But those of us growing up more recently in our community have experienced doing this to and having this done to each other. This is something of which I was unaware. And I'm sorry about that. To those of you that are younger, I'm giving you two apologies. One, not because of what I myself did or didn't do, because where I saw it, I tried to deal with it as a youngster and now. But for my age group, I apologize because, see, a lot of people in my age group aren't really wise elders. They just old fools, or even wise middle-aged people. There's several of us that are old fools. The problem was that those of us that are wise did not discriminate against the stupid fools. And now these stupid fools are the ones that are provoking a lot of this stuff amongst your age group. Whether it's going to someone of their own phenotype and riling them up against the opposite phenotype, or going to someone of the opposite phenotype and provoking a conflict. Whatever the case is, a lot of folks my age, we all knew somebody that was really obsessed with this stuff, and we didn't. We shut them out instead of just shaming them and stopping them. But then again, looking back then, we had no way of knowing how long they would remain so stupid and immature. So there is a difference in how we've experienced it in different age groups. Sorry that we didn't tackle it well enough. I mean, a lot of people I knew tried, but I think the community overall didn't tackle it well enough. There was always somebody around back then that would say, this is stupid. As much as it always popped up, there was always somebody there that would say, this is dumb. And that's why that movie School Days had the ending that it did. This is dumb. Somebody was always there to talk about how crazy this was. Nowadays, a panel could be held, a live stream could be held for hours, with nobody who says anything stupid being challenged, no matter who's on the panel and in what direction it's going to go, both sides. Next thing I'm going to say is that a mistake that has been made by many people of no one particular shade, but of all shades in this debate, a mistake that has been made has been an assumption that it's always one directional and not answered. It's not bi-directional, it's not opposed. Internationally, it seems to have been one directional. Internationally, but in the United States and Canada and the UK, as I said before, it's been answered and it's been offset. Now, that's one mistake on both people's sides. You've got some who they're referred to as light-skinned saviors, and they're usually people of a paler shade that say, I acknowledge my privilege and I don't want unfair advantages over others of my own people. And that's a noble thing to say. The problem is that they're also assuming that it always goes one way. It does not in the US, Canada, the UK. But that's a recording I've already done. Another mistake in both sides discussions, which leads to unnecessary argument, is that people don't realize that colorism in the US varies from region to region. Within the United States, it varies from place to place. It's not always the same. There are a few parts I've heard, a few parts of the states in which I would have had the advantage and I would be having a completely different conversation today. I didn't grow up in these parts. I never really saw it firsthand. But there are some places, there are some areas that people said it was like this. Where I grew up was in the Southeast. I heard actually that it was different in New Orleans. I heard. My brother said it was. I didn't live there to see it myself. But where I lived, which wasn't a very long drive from New Orleans, because I grew up on the Gulf Coast, but where I lived, no, it was not that way. Where I lived, it was like what Jay Cash describes where he lives. And that's also in the Southeast, and I didn't grow up in South Carolina. I've been told that in Virginia, it doesn't really make a difference. I didn't stay in DC long enough to see what the case was. I heard that on the West Coast, I would have been tested in some poor neighborhoods, but the women would not have followed suit and assuming less manliness on my part. That's what I heard. I don't know. But I do understand that it changes from region to region. So when someone says, wait a minute, we light-skinned folk never went on the playgrounds calling dark-skinned people African booty scratching. We never did that. And someone else says, yeah, y'all did. We're talking about two different regions. So the argument comes about because nobody seems to realize that it's different regions of the country being discussed. And so that may be the reason why it is that there's this, you're talking about not just two different playgrounds back in years ago, which in and of itself could be a mistake. In other words, giving too much weight to what happened in childhood or not giving enough weight to what happened in childhood. Now that's a mistake too. Either one of these can be an error. But when people start arguing over what their childhood experiences were like, that's a mistake because they were not only two different kids, they were in different schools and in different regions. So it could very well have been the case. I don't know where it is in the United States that it's not suicidal for light-skinned kids to run around calling dark-skinned kids African booty scratcher. I mean, every place I know of in the States, that's a suicidal thing to do. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some playground in which this is happening. We tend to listen to Rashida Strober and we assume that she's making all of this up. No, she's not. Now, it may have stopped in adulthood. I think Rashida Strober is close to my age, so chances are it would have stopped in adulthood. But you know, just like people would not say it was colorism back then when they were doing whatever they did to her, they're not going to say that, okay, it was, but it's not now. Now it's something else. So she is not making it up. She may even mistake non-colorist hostility for colorist hostility, but she's not making up the hostility. Just like I'm not making up what I say and what I saw happen. I just realized that it's not going to be the same for every individual, certainly not in every region. I have mentioned before, colorism against light-skinned males can be mitigated by certain things: height, muscles, athleticism, a lot of relatives, a reputation. I've mentioned this, but without these things, you don't just, not where I grew up, you don't just walk around with both yellow and looser hair and just go unscathed. That doesn't happen. I don't think that happens even now. Now, there may be parts of the country where it's a bit different. I've been told there was, but we have to understand that when people tell you their experience, don't assume they're making it up. The other mistake that both sides have been making is when they go into name calling and they associate opposite phenotypes with ugliness. So when you have someone with loose curls and yelling at them, which is just a subset of melanin anyway, sitting up and saying it was always the nappy-headed, ugly. Okay, see, so right off the bat, 4C here's ugly. See, that's one mistake. And on the flip side, I always get these light-skinned, average light-skinned chicks hating on me because I'm chocolate and gorgeous. So right off the bat, all light-skinned folk are average. I mean, that's what it sounds like. And you have to be careful when you name call and associate a phenotype with ugliness. What you can say is it was people that were ugly and they hated their own shade that came at me. That makes more sense. Because everybody growing up has had a close friendship with someone, or most people growing up and in adulthood have had close friendships with someone of a completely different phenotype. We have them with people of completely different races and backgrounds. So how do we not have any with someone of a different phenotype within the same race? We got to be fair, and that's a hard thing to do. But a lot of us, we're thinking, no, I need to be militant. I don't need to fight fair. I will tell you that when it comes to something like this, you're trying to hash something out. You're not trying to continue it and fight it. You're not trying to annihilate the other one. So, and they're not out to annihilate you per se. Most people aren't, at least I hope. So that's when you fight fair. That's why I'll sit up and tell you, when it comes to the gender conflict in the West, yes, men fight to win, because that's how you're being fought. It's a massive deception. But when it comes to colorism, you don't have two sides trying to deceive each other to drop their guard first. You don't have one side trying to deceive the other to drop its guard first. You don't have that. No evidence of such. So there's no reason to just be all one-sided. In a gender conflict, you might have to, in the West, you may have to be one-sided. Because I can't go and tell ladies, hey, look, let's stop being so one-sided so these men don't have to be in the future. I can't say that. They're not going to listen to me. They won't listen to another woman that says it. So that's why I'll sit up and say about the gender conflict, yeah, be one-sided. Go ahead. When it comes to this is ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Another mistake is when a lot of the ladies want to tackle this, and it's only about being chosen, and that's all it's about. Childhood bullying and being chosen are the only things they seem to discuss a lot of times. When this young man told me about what his age group or what he had faced, and I realized it was an age difference, and that he was saying that there were others going through this, what I realized is that he had safety and opportunities affected. Safety threatened and opportunities withheld. And I'm not sitting up talking from the standpoint that he's somehow entitled. I don't take that mindset that he's entitled. What I understand is that he was not allowed just regular run-of-the-mill average treatment. The same opportunities someone else might get. Yeah, he tried to work for a Black-owned business. Now, it could be that they just didn't hire him because there were better candidates. Everybody was looking for jobs. That's a possibility. I have to be fair to that possibility. I also have to be fair to the possibility that he's telling the truth. I've got to be fair to both possibilities, both probabilities. And what I'm getting at here is that we can't just assume everybody's lying like we like to do. Next thing I'm going to discuss is going to be historical. Yes, Country Boy 514. I am talking about colorism and how the Black community, especially in the United States, has failed to tackle it. Why and how we failed to tackle it. I've seen saw some of your videos from a while back, and I gotta admit, man, to me, you look like a young fella. And I think that my age group may have failed yours. if I'm assessing or I'm guessing your age correctly. My age group may very well have failed yours, and allowed it to get too far. And I don't really know how bad it is in your particular region. Your area, 514, I think, is an Arkansas area code. So if that's where you're representing, I don't really know how bad it was in Arkansas. I heard from somebody that I used to work with. I covered her actually in previous videos, Sandra. I heard from someone that it was pretty bad when she was coming up, but not violent. She didn't mention violence. She just mentioned a lot of preferential treatment directed at kids based on it. I didn't witness it. That's what she told me. But then again, I also found out some other things that that might undermine what she said. But yeah, I'm talking about how we've failed to tackle colorism. And I'm going to put my age group in, I'm going to hold my age group accountable for half of that. Because see, the other thing was that when social media came about, a lot of us didn't monitor what our kids were looking at. And so people that the jokes that people my age used to tell, the jokes that people my age used to tell, they were taken seriously by a lot of younger people. Okay, North Carolina, all right. The funny thing is that Jay Cash is in South Carolina, right next door. From what he was saying is that he was saying the opposite, but he's in South Carolina. And from what he told me, if you're a male, it's a liability. It doesn't help you at all. It hinders you. That from what he said, even the girls that like lighter skinned men where he grew up, they'll hide it because they don't want to be seen out in public with them. And that's exactly what I saw happen where I grew up on the Gulf Coast. And when I moved to Atlanta as an adult, it was the same thing. And so, but see, that's the thing. You saw one thing in North Carolina. I saw something on the Gulf Coast. But if we were the type that were making mistakes in the discussion and trying to discuss it but not really tackle it, this is what would wind up happening. On a lot of the live streams and panels, I see where they try to tackle this, or that I can't even say they try to tackle it. What'll happen is that somebody will say, well, I'm tired of y'all crapping on light-skinned men and making these jokes about us. We're not less masculine. You may come along and let's say someone comes along and says, well, where I came up, women showed y'all more love than the darker brothers. And then they get into an argument, failing to realize that the reason why each one saw what they did was because they came up in different areas. So neither one has to be lying. Somebody came up in another area. And that's what it was. Okay, yeah, exactly. So you witnessed the regionalism yourself. In Arizona, you saw something else. I visited Arizona, I never lived there. And so I can't tell you that what you saw, you didn't see. I can't say that. But there would be people that are trying to at least somehow address colorism, but they're not prepared to even admit that somebody else is going to have a different experience, especially when they come up in a different region. And so I'm glad you're telling us this, because see, the more we tell what happened in our region, the more we can understand how regional it is. And then there'll come a day when we'll say, everybody knows what it's like from one place to another. But right now we don't have that because we don't have enough people telling what you're willing to tell, and we don't have enough other people listening when someone's willing to tell what they went through. And when I came up on the Gulf Coast, in the 80s, it was like what you saw in North Carolina. I was a little boy then, but I saw it. I heard the ladies say it themselves. They were actually picking all kinds, to be honest with you. When I was a little kid, I saw they picked all kinds. They had all kinds of boyfriends. But when 1989 came, by the time 89 turned into 1990, it had changed, it had reversed. And I was more aware of it when I look back than I was at that time as it was going on. Let's see here. Okay, was this in Arizona you're talking about? Black women were more feminine because it was less black men to choose from, and the black men that were, they only chose white females and Latinas. Are you talking about in Arizona at that time? Oh, and any of you listening, let me know if the air conditioner makes it too loud, if it interferes with the sound quality. It's not loud or quiet where I am, but I don't know how it's coming through the microphone. So any listeners, feel free to let me know. Okay, all right, in Arizona. And so you see, we're learning something, man. And it's hard for people on other panels to learn something because they make these assumptions that somebody's got to be lying. If I didn't notice that mistake and I was gonna make it, I would be like, man, Arizona, man, no, bro, what you talking about? But you live there, and you saw it, and I'm glad you're telling us. Because if we're gonna tackle it, we gotta understand how it changes from region to region. And this says something. This is why we gotta tackle gender issues differently from how we tackle color issues. Because see, as you said, in Arizona, it took a shortage of black men for them to act feminine, for the sisters to act feminine. That's what it took for them, a shortage. And that says something about the mindset. That tells us something right there. So we got to be more militant about how we handle the gender issue than we have to be about how we handle the colorism issue. We got to be more balanced in how we handle colorism. We can't afford to be that balanced in how we handle the gender issues. We got to be balanced, but we can't afford to be as balanced as what we would think, because when it comes down to the gender issue, like I said before, it's a war. In the West, she's fighting a war to get your resources for another man's baby. In most cases. And the ones that aren't get ridiculed if they come out and say this is not the way to treat these men. I mean, there are good ones out there, sure, but they get stifled, they get shut down right off the bat. And I want this to not become the case as we tackle colorism. I want to prevent that before it gets to that point, because there's starting to pop up this militancy, and people are being told to pick one. Screw the balance, screw the middle of the road, shuck that fit, go straight to one at the extreme, and killing the one not just on the other extreme, but even in the middle. So to the ones that are on one extreme and they want to retaliate for every act of bullying in which a light-skinned person was a victim, they would look at me as not militant enough and say, okay, this dude Black Mind is a light-skinned savior, telling us to check our privilege. We don't have any privilege. When in fact, I know that we don't have a net privilege, but we do have instances of privilege. We don't have a net privilege because the community to which we do belong and overwhelmingly claim, which is the Black community, makes sure that nobody has a privilege. And if there's a perceived instance of privilege, the community is going to unanimously make sure you pay for that. So if it's not real, but it's just a perception, you still pay. You pay for a privilege that they perceive you have if you don't even have it. And so thanks, Mr. Grimes, for letting me know about the air conditioning. So on the flip side, they're going to be the ones that say, check your privilege. As a matter of fact, y'all ain't even part of our community. Y'all ain't even part of our race. Y'all a bunch of mutts, and y'all have always been oppressing us even before the white man ever did. And they would look at me and they would say, you're not capable of being fair to the rest of us. And deep down, you want to be completely white anyway. So there are these two extremes that are already starting to pop up. And what I'm saying is, don't take it that far, because it already went too far with the gender issues. It's too far gone. The only way we can decide we're not going to fight a war is to leave the West. And even then, you got to go to the right place outside of the West to avoid it. Because like I've said before, the matrix is coming for Zion, meaning that militant anti-Black misandry, or even just misandry, is coming for places that previously didn't even know about feminism, or just knew it existed and didn't adopt it. So check this out. Black females down south, no, it's way more Black men to choose from, so they're more masculine. See, that says everything right there. It's more to choose from. But they still sit up and say that there's a bit of a shortage. As you noticed, there was a pronounced shortage in Arizona, but it's still a shortage when you're in the Southeast. And the further up the socioeconomic ladder you go, and the older she gets, the more of a shortage they report. But just the mere presence of Black males makes them decide to act more masculine. And the problem I have with that is, it's not what you said. I'm not blaming you because you observed it. We've observed it. Everybody has. The issue I got is Why is it that if they feel they can relax, their relaxation mode is masculinity? Why do they pick that as the default? That's what's bothering me. That's what gets my goat about it. Oh, I can sit back and relax. So why does relaxing mean acting like you the man? You call the shots. That's what gets to me. They always have to have this fight for the position of authority and the position of manhood. And they don't realize, yeah, that pushes away any man. And there are those that sometimes one of them can jump the fence and get a man from another background. And I'm gonna tell y'all what happens. My Muslim brother in Atlanta was talking about that. He's African American too, but he was working with some Muslim men from other backgrounds that had married black women. And they said, yeah, we were married to them. And we're not gonna do that again because they love to argue. Every time we say something, it's an argument. So some of them can't turn that off when they do get another man from another background and they drive him away. At least they're consistent. They're not hypocrites, but unfortunately they drive away any options. And then the other ones do turn that off when they get a man from another background. That makes them hypocrites because then they're actually willing to cooperate with a man as long as he's not black, or rather I should say white, because usually when they do that, they cooperate with the white guy, not even other men of color. And yeah, black females that's from the West Coast love the South because black men give them way more attention. They have told me this, that's why they love places like ATL and other major cities in the South. You know what? Somebody from Boston told me the same thing back in 1996. She was nice to look at. I didn't understand a lot of words she said, especially if they had an R in them. You know, the Bostonians don't pronounce their R's. Oh, I tease them about that. But she was from the opposite coast. She was from the Northeast, and she told me the same thing. She said, I came down to Atlanta, and man, these guys. But when I asked her, well, what happened up there in Boston? And she said, I was too dark and too thick. And so I admit there have been times when darker skinned women have heard that they're undesirable. I don't necessarily believe that that's every single time they say it, but I do know that back then you could hear it. I don't know how often you hear it now. I haven't lived in the US in 6 years. I admit that. I know that when I was a teenager, you could hear stuff like that. She's pretty for a dark skinned girl. And the thing is, guys would say that and they would still give her a chance. But Ms. Philosophy, I have a question. When you say, why should light-skinned men have to do that? Can I ask what it is exactly? I'm not trolling. I'm just asking what you mean when you say do that. And by the way, good morning, Ms. Philosophy. I'll give you some time to type it in. Because see, Ms. Philosophy, when you type, you capitalize and punctuate. So you're gonna need a little bit more time. And I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm saying that as an English teacher. I know that happens, and now I'm teaching long distance. So I noticed that with my students that type real quick, no caps, no punctuation, grammar is up, fuck, all that. But when my students take a longer time, usually they have a better typed message. So, and plus I'm gonna let you know right off the bat, Ms. Philosophy, we American English teachers, we tease English teachers from the UK, and you all tease us. So if I do crack any jokes about the differences between our English, they're just jokes. I don't really mean any harm. But yeah, I'm waiting to hear what does do that mean. Okay. Well, while I'm waiting on that, these are the mistakes that we've been making on both sides. I've heard everybody of every phenotype do this with the opposite phenotype. And the truth be told, even the definition of who is pale, who is dark, and who is in the middle tends to change from place to place. I've noticed that as well too. Some people have said that when they were up north, they were in the middle, and then they went down south and they were quite pale. And some people have said that they were, some of them have said that they were up north and they were in the middle. And then, I'm sorry, that they were up in the south, that they were considered in the middle, and then they went up north and they were dark. I've heard some people say that. So I understand that even the definition of who's who can change from region to region within the United States. I'm not really sure about how different that is in the UK. Ms. Philosophy could tell us if it changes from region to region within the UK, but I don't know. That's something I have to learn from somebody that's lived elsewhere. But I know in the States, even that can change. Last thing I'm going to say, let's see here. Hold on. All right, country boy, my light-skinned homeboys, we don't have to do anything, no dates or anything. They have to show up. We live in two different worlds. I'm a darker brother. I have to do way more to get her time and attention. Well, country boy, when I saw your videos, the funny thing is where I lived, you would have been considered you'd have been in the middle. Where I came up, you would have never been told that you were too pale or too dark. Maybe generations ago, some families might have said you were too dark, but their daughters would not have said so. That's generations back. But where I grew up, you would have never been, but then again, we have a wide range in the Gulf Coast. So you would have been considered in the middle. But that's something in North Carolina, you're noticing that right now, even today, that it's a whole different story. So give me a moment. I'm going to mute the mic because I'm going to wipe down the keyboard. Give me a second. I spilled something on it and then come right back on. Ms. Philosophy, are you asking me the question or are you asking Country Boy? I'll give you time to type that too. All right, sorry about the muting. Had to do that. So there is handsome privilege like pretty privilege, and yeah, I'm sure that is the case. I'm not going to lie, that's a very valid point. We do treat people differently based on a lot of things regarding appearance. When it comes to how we select our mates, that's true. And I'm not going to try to invalidate an actual personal preference. I'm not going to do that. An actual personal preference, I'm not attacking people for having it, but I'm going to get to that in a bit, inshallah. But I am here to oppose anybody of any phenotype being singled out for any kind of mistreatment, whether it's related to jobs or slander or anything of that nature. I'm here to oppose that, period. If I don't even necessarily do that to white folks based on their whiteness, I have to oppose when black folks do it to each other, but not necessarily to invalidate someone having a preference. It is true that we tend to treat people differently. We need to stop mistreating them and stop lying on them. And it is true. Yeah, country boy, we're dealing with that in the States. We're dealing with that. A lot of sisters in the States are choosing men based strictly on looks and not substance. They could say that we're doing the same thing. They could say that. But the difference is that the guys who go their whole lives doing that, we might know they exist, but we don't necessarily get that tight with them because the mindset's obviously very different. So someone that's going to go through his adult life doing this, he's not that close to you because he approaches other things like that too. And it makes y'all two different. And I've been through that as well. They exist, but they don't get validated by the rest of us. Whereas on the sister side in the States, they get invalidated by their friends if they're willing to choose independently. So I've seen that happen too. And when I finish making the points, I'm going to open the panel up to let people come on, inshallah. But I'll probably have I may have about a half hour when I do. The last thing I wanted to cover before I open up the panel is some historical misconceptions that shape today's discussions about colorism. So I'm gonna try to go through them at a medium speed, not so fast you can't hear me, not so slow you go to sleep. I'm gonna do my best. But here, the misconceptions are regarding house and field slaves, the Willie Lynch letter, personal preferences versus cultural preferences, that's what I've just mentioned, and DNA. And we got misconceptions about these things, and I'm gonna get on them. Let's see here. The thing that what men consider women consider is handsome differ. Yeah, they do differ. And this Country Boy 514 is exactly what the manosphere is about. Ms. Philosophy, I did do a video a little while back about why buttermilk brothers, meaning light-skinned men, why they do have a reason to be part of the manosphere. I don't know if you heard it because it was pretty long, but let me know if you heard that video, Ms. Philosophy. I didn't say that to knock you, but to explain. But tell me if you saw that one, Ms. Philosophy. Did you hear or see that video? And in any case, Country Boy just now explained one of the things that gives us a reason too. And that is that, and see, really, light-skinned men, short men, non-athletic men, like light-skinned black men, short black men, non-athletic black men, non-stereotypical black men, all have what I call non-idness, really, intentionally dysfunctional negative stereotypes, IDNS. Non-idness black men in the States definitely have, and I'm sure in Canada and the UK too, have every reason to be a part of the specifically black manosphere. I don't tell us to go into the white manosphere because they got their own issues. And frankly, their society deserves what they're going through. And I'm not saying that because they're white, I'm saying it because of what they've done. That may sound hotepish to you, I understand, but there's a time when hoteps are right and there's a time when they need to be slapped like everybody else. This is one of them times they're right. Western Europeans deserve a lot worse than what they're getting. If God rained fire on Western Europe, that they still wouldn't begin to pay for what they've done to other people. And most Western Europeans today feel that way about their own people. But anyway, what Country Boy is saying here is this right there. Because if you are a light-skinned black man, unless of course you're really tall, athletic, people are scared of you for some reason. By default, you're a light-skinned black man in the Southeast where I lived, and in other parts of Black America. If you were a short black man, if you were just not athletic, things like that, then, I mean, a normal person, then you got slated as the cleanup man. 13% of the guys are the ones that the women want to have the babies for. The other 87%, or most of the other 87%, are seen as stepdads. You have this guy's baby, you bring that kid over here to these guys that you would not have touched at a younger age, and then you bring the kids to them, and either you trick them into raising the kids as their own, or you guilt them into accepting the kids as their own. And this one is true too. That's also true. So getting back to what I was saying about how we're going to discuss colorism and how we got to remove certain historical misconceptions. First thing is about the house and the field slaves. And I'm not going to lie, most of these misconceptions, most of them, tend to come from those that are more pro-black. And I, as a pro-black, means I got to correct my own camp about this. We misconceive things about the house and field slaves. First off, house and field slaves were not the stations that were determined based on shade. They weren't even determined based on being related to the master, being his child, because the wives of the masters were a big threat to anyone that the master showed favoritism, whether it was a lady slave he wanted to dig out or the children that he created. And the movie 12 Years a Slave illustrated this. That was one of the historical accuracies. I used to have to teach English back in the States before I left, and this is where I learned a lot of this stuff from. House and field slaves were determined based on pretty much just what your parents were, because that was a skill set that you learned in your childhood. So if all you learned was agricultural work, then that was your experience. So by the time you had to be sold your first time, that's what you were sold as. So it really was kind of hereditary, but it wasn't necessarily based on being the child. Remember, Frederick Douglass was he was not a house or field slave. He was a skilled slave, but he was also the son of one of the masters. But he was a skilled slave, and he didn't grow up in the Deep South where the slavery conditions were the hardest, just as an example. So it really just depended on what skills you learned first, and that would have depended on who was responsible for raising you. Because remember, they sold kids away from their own parents frequently. That was something that they did intentionally because they had to suppress the languages. They didn't want African languages passed down, and they were afraid of revolts. So this was a systemic thing they did. So this myth that if you were light skinned, you were automatically in the house really is a myth. And not only that, but not everybody light skinned came from the master's loins either, because even on the continent, you have tribes with different complexions. Ms. Philosophy has touched on that, and I'm glad you did, because we needed to know about that. That goes to the genetic misconceptions we have. Next misconception I talked about was the Willie Lynch letter. The Willie Lynch letter is not what people say it is. It was an allegory for what slave masters did to control the people that they owned. The Willie Lynch letter was, it was like a symbol. That's what it was about. It was, okay, I'll put it like this. The planter class, that was a minority of the slaveholders. The planter class, I think there was something like 5% of all white Southerners. They owned the majority of the slaves. A minority of the slaves were owned by the majority of the slave owners. In other words, most slave owners owned one or two. Most slave owners were not rich, they were middle class. Most poor whites could not own anybody, couldn't afford to make the first payment. Most middle class whites did own one or two slaves. The majority of the slave population was owned by the top wealthy minority that was called the planter class. The planter class also had another two professions. They were attorneys, oftentimes, and they were also legislators. So they were the ones that went to the state capitals for the legislative sessions, or they got elected to the federal Congress, and they went to Washington, D.C. for the legislative sessions. Now, what this meant was this planter class was very tight-knit. They knew each other. So when they met for the legislative sessions, the laws they passed, it was easy for them to pass to control us. Also, when they were not working, they were talking to each other, and they had plenty of opportunity to talk about how do you control your slaves. This was a major concern of theirs. So of course they discussed it when they were not busy working. And they had legislative sessions at the state capitals or at the US Capitol to meet and discuss things like this, and they traded notes. So it would have only taken, by the time the United States was independent, the planter class had already traded notes with each other about what you do to control your slaves. And one of them was you keep them divided. It didn't matter what you used to divide them, whatever's available. Shade was one of them. So the Willie Lynch letter was a good allegorical explanation for a real phenomena that happened without the need for a letter. That's what the reality behind the division is. The Willie Lynch letter was not one letter. It was not one guy named William Lynch meeting with a bunch of slaveholders on the banks of the James River in the 1700s and spelling things back then the way that they would have been spelled in the 1900s. because the spelling of the English language changed over time. So we talk about the Willie Lynch letter, that's real. No, it's an allegory for something that's real. That's what that was. It's just like, for instance, it's like Wakanda is an allegory for a few African nations that actually aren't doing too bad. Botswana's got a good economy. They actually have very strict immigration rules because everybody wants to live there, just as an example. Rwanda's been up and coming. So, Wakanda, even though they started before Botswana's economy really became strong, it was an allegory for parts of Africa that were great to live in. That's what that was about. We know Wakanda's not a real place yet, but I'm just saying it was an allegory for something that was real at the time and is still real today. Same with the Willie Lynch letter. Next thing, personal preferences versus cultural preferences. There's a reason that I don't attack black men and black women in the West for their personal preferences, but I get on these Arabs and Indians and Pakistanis when they want to marry the lightest, palest person they can find. Here's why I do it. It's simple. In the United States, actually, you're allowed to have a personal preference for the most part. And Country Boy will tell, he'll back me up on this. If you're a black man and you prefer, whatever you prefer, other men aren't really going to get on your case about it. As long as you don't disparage someone, you're pretty much not going to really have people, at least other men, getting on your case. So, especially if you're a black man and you prefer the chocolate, okay, you're not really going to get anybody jumping on your case about that. If you're a black man and you prefer them in the middle, no one's going to argue. If you prefer them light skinned, very few people will argue with you about it, especially if you don't disparage anyone. If you don't have a preference, I'm not really going to argue with you about that. And you're going to find black men that have all of these preferences or no preference. Same in the West with black women. You're going to find black women that prefer darker men, and nobody's going to say anything to them about it. They're going to get praised for that. The ones that prefer men in the middle, they're going to be left alone. What's going on, Supreme Ace? You got the ones that do prefer lighter skinned men, but where I grew up, they would get shamed for that. They were not allowed to say that. Peace, free will defender. So when black women did prefer lighter skinned men, when I came up, yeah, it existed, but they really got, if they expressed that or they got caught with that preference, they really got shamed for it. But what I'm saying is that the preferences did exist. In Black America, and I assume in Canada and the UK, you really do have individual preferences. Where I am, it's not individual, it's cultural. How do I know? I go out with my wife. People stare. They don't hate us. They're not angry. They're just shocked. But they stare. Now, I was asked why I married a black woman. Nobody's ever asked my wife why she married a man that looks like me, even though I'm black. Why does she marry this at least non-black looking man? Don't ask her that. Before I met her, I was in another town, a smaller town with an even more Bedouin. And I straight told them, look, if y'all looking for a wife for me, introduce me to the ones from Eastern Africa. Why? Why the hell not? I'm from West Africa. You see, a few people, like maybe two guys, actually said I was crazy. Now, they were making a joke, but they still thought it was funny because they could say crazy, because they didn't know any men that actually had a preference for darker skinned women, let alone actual black African women. This is part of their culture. And that's why I say, pardon my French, but I'm saying it. That's why I say, fuck Arab culture, fuck Indian culture, fuck Pakistani culture, throw them out, fuck Chinese culture, fuck Korean culture, but especially Arab, Pakistanis, and Indians. Because you see, they got this melanin themselves, and they will take a European woman over their own. It's not just that they don't want the women from Africa, but if you offer them a choice between, especially here where I am, Supreme Ace, we're West African. Most African Americans are of West African and Central African origin. That's what I meant. I meant genetically speaking. So I'm not saying I was born and raised, that my parents were born and raised in West Africa, but we do trace back there. But I was telling them, what I was saying to them is, hey, look, my origins in one half of the continent. I'm saying, you got ladies here from the other side of the continent. You can introduce us. We straight. In other words, I'm a black man asking about black women. What is your problem? That's what I was getting at. But see, here, if you take a picture of an Arab woman, one of their own, gorgeous, let's say bronze, and you take a picture of a Bosnian woman, one of their own, pale, gorgeous, or even average. Walaikum salam, Artzak, apekabar, kamirindu kamo. So if you take those two and you show it to these Arab men, what are they going to do? They're going to jump over the woman of their own background to try to get that European woman. Some of them don't even care if the European woman's not Muslim. And I told them, look, you got to watch out for that, because they don't. Oh, it's okay, Miss Philosophy, I understand. Some of them have said, you know, some of them have said, I don't care if she ain't even Muslim. She could worship the sun, the moon, the stars. I'll teach her how to be Muslim, inshallah. And I have to tell them, they don't listen to you. You're a backwards Bedouin, a brown Bedouin from the Arabian Peninsula, from the desert. If they marry you, it's because they think you got a lot of money. They don't look up to you. They don't look at you as an equal man. And you talking about you would jump over one of your own women with the same religion as you, which is very important to us, just because this other one's got blonde hair and blue eyes. So no, I don't respect that preference. And this is why we all need to deal with them like this. We will maintain the right for us to have individual preferences because they're actually individual, without respecting their cultural preferences, because their cultural preferences are white supremacists and they're an insult to us. They're even an insult to themselves. So we have every right to demand our own personal preferences as a right, and then turn to them and say, fuck your culture, fuck your preference. You got an inferiority complex. You're a white supremacist enemy. Hotep as that sounds, that's what some of them need to hear. Not because they walk around hating black people, but because they walk around just taking for granted that we're like lesser creatures, even if they love us. And a way to shock them out of that is by making them understand that you do not tolerate the oppressor being held up as an equal to the oppressed. You don't have to be a Hotep or a Notep or a crazy pro-whack for that to be the case. You could just be about self-defense and equality for people and being fair. You could tell them that, and then that's how they get it. That's what makes them understand. Listen, Philosophy, I did have a question at the top, and I'm going to highlight your question. I'm going to highlight what you said earlier that I did have a question about, if I can get this thing to scroll up. So I did have a question about something you said. It wasn't to troll, I just didn't know what you meant. But it was, let's see here. First one, I think you may have erased it. Okay, this one here, Miss Philosophy. When you said, but why should light-skinned men have to do that? And then the next thing you said was, it's almost like light-skinned people validate dysfunction. I wasn't sure what you meant by that, because it may have, you may have written that after a point that I made. I just didn't know which one you meant. So I'm curious about what do that. I'm curious about what it was that you meant we do in that case. But so I'd love to see what you meant. But anyway, the next thing, the misconception we have, the historical misconception we have, is that it's based on the one I just said. We don't have to respect cultural preferences that are anti-black, even if it's just about beauty. We don't have to respect that. While we do demand and insist on our right to have personal preferences, that one ties into the next one I'm about to say. We have this misconception that our people are just as colorist as every other people, with equally little resistance to the white supremacist direction of colorism, the pro-white, anti-black type colorism. That's not true. Our people are not necessarily equally as colorist as some other folks. We don't hold a candle to, and Artzak will tell you, you got light skin privilege and colorism even in Indonesia. He's up there telling people, look, the way that you were made is fine. You don't need to change that. Throw out the skin bleach. He's gotten on people's case about using skin bleach. Artzak has done this. Alhamdulillah, mashallah alaikum. So we have to understand that we think that we're equally colorist. We're too diverse. There are those of us that are, those of us that are not. We're all over the place. But we actually, and I'm talking mostly about African Americans and some conscious Africans and Afro-Caribbean people, we actually are the first ones that ever resisted that. This was never resisted by anybody that was not black until they got it from us. End of story. It wasn't there. There was no resistance to it on a mass level, on a community level. I know because I lived with an Arab guy that resisted it, and he was by himself. I was the first person that had ever agreed with him being against colorism. The first person. So he got empowered living with me for a while. This was before I became Muslim. Last one, and I am going to have to I'm going to have to bounce in a little bit, but the last historical misconception, or in this case scientific misconception, we got to get rid of is certain things we take for granted about DNA. Now, I'm not an expert on DNA. Even my dad, who was a physician, is not an expert on DNA. What I do want to say about DNA is that if we don't know about genes and alleles, it's okay to say we don't know. But we can't get up here and get triggered by certain words that actually do have a valid scientific basis. Dominant and recessive. We tend to get mad at that. No, actually, genetically speaking, there are dominant alleles and recessive alleles. The allele for dark colored eyes, dark colored hair, and darker colored skin in human beings usually are dominant over the alleles for lesser melanin production in hair, skin, and eyes. That's just based on how long human beings are around and what traits we started off with. That's all that is. So hazel eyes being a recessive trait is not an insult. Same thing goes with lighter skin generally being a recessive trait. That's not an insult per se. Genetically speaking, it is in human beings. And so there are two reasons that a person can show a recessive trait. And that is, number one, they pick up one recessive allele from each parent. And so they only have two recessive alleles for that particular trait. That's all they can show. The other reason is that they pick up an allele for a dominant trait and it's in the off position. Because genes actually have off and on positions. I don't fully understand it, but I read up on it so that I wouldn't be completely stupid about it when I talked about it. Genes can come in the off and on position. Fortunately, most genes are on. But to give an example, all human beings have one gene that's always off. And thank God it is. And that's the gene to hibernate. Bears have the exact same gene. We got it, they got it. Their gene to hibernate is on. Ours is off. If it was on this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, we would be gorging on food, insanely hungry, trying to gain weight, and then we would start to get sleepy in a few weeks. In the Southern Hemisphere, they will be waking up. That's if the human beings had that gene in the on position. Fortunately for us, it's never on, it's always off. We're lucky. But I'm just saying that we like to get into these discussions of DNA without knowing what we're talking about. I know a little bit. I told you what I know. I don't know more, but I do know that we're getting triggered by regular scientific facts to the point we won't even entertain a discussion. And so we can't tackle this issue if that's going to be the case. So that being said, I'm going to look at some of what you all are saying and some of the comments here. And in the 9 minutes, I'm going to have to bounce. So I'm sorry for not bringing folks onto the panel. I actually wanted to, but we got somewhere we got to be in the middle of the day here. It's still morning time, but it's almost the middle of the day. Okay, I refer to the list you gave of the physical attributes light-skinned men have to have within the environment you lived, or they will be targets. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, that is the case. What I was referring to is things that could offset the default. The default, of course, is that there'll be targets, at least where I lived. And it is sad, but then again, this is why I use the term idness, intentionally dysfunctional negative stereotype. This is something a lot of our people believe about ourselves in your country and in mine, and even in the Caribbean to a certain extent. So because we've accepted this, what I'm saying is that a lot of our culture in the Americas is based on us accepting other people's negative stereotypes of us. And this is why I do tend to go hard in the Black manosphere. And I say, gentlemen, if you're not going to meet these stereotypes, that's fine. You cannot validate women who choose men based on these negative stereotypes, because that's a type of warfare. Even if they think they're rebelling, it's actually a kind of warfare, because they're demanding that we be the enemy stereotypes. Let's see here. Free Will Defender says, I wish more ADOS colorists knew about the caste systems of Asia. Yeah, it would be nice if we did, because that was actually encoded in a religion. And to be honest with you, free will defender, that was where it started. My own colleague who was from Afghanistan, he's an English teacher, would be here, but he's from Afghanistan, told me it was the Aryan people, because Aryans didn't start off as Europeans. They started off as Iranians and Afghans, and that they began this stuff. He told me that himself, pretty much ratting out his own people. All right, folks, unfortunately, time's up, but I want to say this. Supreme Ace, you nailed a lot of the beginnings of this argument here. Number one, a lot of you young folks have to go through a more intense form than we ever did. You should not have had to, but you did. And that was partially the fault of my age group. But number two, yeah, you've got these two in the States that are not only from the motherland, but specifically one country that's very contentious. And then they're from the specific culture within that country that is very contentious. And they were the ones that were bringing the discussion back. And they've been doing it. Apparently, they've been doing it for over a decade. So that's why you got some cats that are 22 now that are talking about what they've been dealing with from the time they were 12. Because of how long some of them have been doing this. But I won't front. Most of us were trying to get rid of this and actually confront it and tackle it until these two agitators jumped in, pretty much passing themselves off as multi-generational. And I don't have a problem with people from different places, especially black folks from different places, but they were taking this obsession that came from a specific region and they were pushing it on in the name of opposing white supremacy, which 10 years ago I would have supported wholeheartedly, thinking that that's what they were doing. But anyway, I got to run, and I do appreciate y'all coming on, especially because it's late at night and early in the morning for you all. But the last thing I'm gonna say is we have a problem with anti-intellectualism. We hate education, we hate knowledge, we hate literacy. And that's really what's making a lot of this stuff possible. So again, if we're willing to learn and read from valid sources, then jump into discussion and contribute and listen when others contribute, it'll be a lot different. Because the real division we need is not supposed to be based on shade. The real division that we need is exactly what Artsub just typed into the comment. Why is it colorism instead of fighting white supremacy? The real division we need, if we're going to divide ourselves, needs to be based on intelligence. Pretty much the smart people throwing out the stupid people, so that we will have nobody left except those that are smart enough to fight against white supremacy, because it is a religion. White supremacy, don't get it twisted, it is a religion. Its false god is whiteness. So thank y'all for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope one day this won't be necessary, but in the meantime, I hope it helps. And I do wish you all well. All of y'all that were on here, every last one of you, even if some of you got doubts about it, I do wish y'all well from the bottom of my black heart and depth of my black mind. So take care, y'all. Assalamu alaikum. And black heterosexual non-select male power just because they don't like it.